All right. Well, we're all here. I can't talk, but we're here to record a podcast. It's been like a couple weeks, so I'm glad we're getting and doing this on a Friday. How you doing, guys?
Oh, doing all right.
Chris is representing.
I know.
Jen didn't get the memo, apparently.
You're not wearing your spoon T-shirt.
I'm representing 1993.
You are.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is oversized plaid. The audience, I'm sure, appreciates all this.
Yeah, they can't see.
I should hope so.
Speaking of going back a couple of decades, I decided to watch Breakfast Club again, and my wife and I started asking, do we want to get our kids into these old John Hughes films? And we decided that our kids will think they're super boring. So, Chris, have you tried to do this yet?
Yeah, Oscar. He really liked Ferris Bueller.
That's pretty timeless.
Yeah, that was he had fun with that, but we haven't done the other ones. You know, there's a lot of those things that haven't aged well for some of those movies. So, there's like, oh, you can watch it, but we need to have a talk about why some of these things are not okay. Yeah,
and they go deep. Yeah. They go deep on that particular movie. If you've ever listened to Rewatchables with Bill Simmons, they have a great edition on that. But this is not what this podcast is about. No. We're not going to talk about 80s pop culture. We're going to talk about food tech. And the first story that I want to talk about, Jen, is one you wrote about, or Chris, was it you who wrote about the Zool funding news, where one of the big cloud kitchen companies, I think, raised $9 million or so?
To be fair, the only reason I wrote it is because it's been a friggin' crazy busy week, especially when it comes to funding. And so Jen, who would normally write about it because she wrote a big report about it, was otherwise busy. So I wrote the Zool kitchen things, but really we should talk to Jen about it because she's got the skinny on what's going on in the ghost kitchen space. But I can give you the headline. Zool raised $9 million to expand ghost kitchen operations in New York.
And they are centered in New York. So are they kind of basically expanding in their home base?
Chris, I can answer that. They're expanding around New York City. They opened a location in Soho last year. And so this funding round is going to just allow them to expand around New York City, which I think is, it's an interesting choice. It's not, you see like Kitchen United, for example, is expanding, all over the country, but Zool is keeping, God knows there's plenty of opportunity in New York right now for ghost kitchen space. So it might actually be really smart of them to stay razor focused like that.
I was going to say, Jen, you wrote a report on the cloud kitchen, ghost kitchen market. There was a recent Euromonitor forecast, which is an insane number. They predicted 10 years, ghost kitchens become a $1 trillion market. Anytime you use $1 trillion in a forecast, that's kind of insane. But I wanted to ask you, for the listeners, can you draw the distinctions between a few of the different types of these startups? So where Zool would fit versus maybe some of these other providers? Because it does seem like some of these guys are a little bit different in their business models.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, and we go into this in the report, there's more than one kind of ghost kitchen at this point. Let's be honest, there's a pandemic happening and restaurants are shut down in a lot of places. So every restaurant's a ghost kitchen at the moment, for all intensive purposes. But there's a few different kinds of ghost kitchens. I think the one that people most commonly think of is the commissary. That's a third-party provider, owns the space. They rent it to different restaurants who can use it. But within that commissary model are different models. So, Zool and Kitchen United, they rent kitchen space and equipment and such to existing restaurants who maybe want to fulfill more delivery orders or reach a location they don't have a brick and mortar store in. But you've also got a company like Keto who will actually do all the work for the restaurant. So whereas with Kitchen United, you would bring in your own staff, except maybe, the dishwashers. Keto actually they have their own staff that preps the food, fulfills it. They have the partnerships with the delivery companies, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a little bit of a different take on that commissary model. And then you have a company I think is really interesting and brand new called Chef Ready, and they just launched this year in Denver. And what they say is that they're bringing more of a mom and pop mentality to ghost kitchens. Like, they're not, I mean, yes, they're renting space, or they will rent space to mom and pops, but, they're not going to limit themselves to that. But they're more sort of, they're bootstrapped for one thing as a company. So they're not, investors aren't calling the shots in terms of what they can and cannot do. And then when I spoke to the founder, she sort of went into, they're really focused on creating this community of restaurants, whether it's brand new virtual restaurants that maybe didn't exist before the ghost kitchen, or if it's existing restaurants coming in, but really sort of trying to create kind of a long-term food community in this ghost kitchen facility.
And then you have the Deliveroo Editions type of approach, where it's basically they're a food delivery company, but they're basically creating virtual restaurants on top of essentially a cloud kitchen model, right? So they have a bunch of restaurant or a bunch of kitchens. They're just going to put all these different brands within their app. It's convenient. And I mean, that was a couple of years ago. I know that they may have evolved a little bit, but that was what the original concept around Deliveroo Editions, right?
Yeah, and they're still doing that. That's also something Cloud Kitchens does, is it has, some of its own virtual restaurant brands that work and live out of this ghost kitchen operation. I think that's a really interesting point for the future, because I think one of the big questions around ghost kitchens right now is, when will these virtual brands that ghost kitchens like Deliveroo and Cloud Kitchens are starting themselves, when will they start to compete with the people with the restaurants that, who are renting space? Like, what will that sort of competition look like in the future?
Chris, I interrupted you a while back. Any thoughts on this?
Oh, just that, in today's $9 million isn't a ton of money, right? Especially when you're building out facilities. So I would imagine that, and they didn't disclose a lot about it, if I recall, like who the investors were or how that money was structured, right? So it doesn't surprise me that they're sticking with New York, especially because if they know it already and they can go across the 5 boroughs, like Jen said, there's plenty of opportunity there.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's lots of reasons why I think this new sector, which really 2 years ago people hadn't really thought of, it just has so much heat to it. I think the first kind of seminal tectonic shift was the fact that people heard that Travis Kalanick was getting into this space. I mean, if you have the original founder of Uber looking to create the next big thing, and all of a sudden he's looking at this, I think that brought a lot of attention to the marketplace. And then I think, just quite honestly, COVID has just really kind of shook up the entire restaurant business. And to your point, Jen, like maybe every restaurant in the future becomes to some degree a cloud kitchen, but I certainly think if you look forward 5 years, there's going to be lots of brands of restaurants that you may access through a third-party app like an Uber Eats or a DoorDash that doesn't have any physical world operations. They're just completely living in the cloud. The food's being cooked in a centralized kitchen. You order it and it's delivered to your home.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of that will depend on what the heck happens to the dine-in restaurant experience, over the next, let's say, 6 months, because, we were writing about this morning. It's in-restaurant sales were growing. Now they're down again because of the spike in cases and places shutting down again. So, you sort of have to wonder, if we take fine dining and just put it aside for a second, of the sort of kind of more just affordable dining options, how many of those dining rooms are actually going to exist? How many of those restaurants will just throw up their hands and go move to a delivery only model and move into some sort of ghost kitchen operation that way?
Well, it's interesting news. We'll keep an eye on it. For those of you who want to go deep on this, Jen just wrote a report. It's actually, if you go to the spoon.tech, you'll find it there. If you subscribe to Spoon Plus, you get access report. A little plug. Why not? The next story I want to write about is Most of Meat, or talk about is Most of Meat. It's a story I wrote and I published, I think, 2 days ago. And this is really an interesting thing. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about, guys, is how do these cultivated meat companies ultimately scale to the point where we can just replace lots of traditional meat that comes through the industrial meat complex? Is this a future where we're just going to have really massive bioreactors that are the size of factories and producing meat? And so one of the things that ultimately also gets us there is just how do we reduce the cost of it? And so most of meat, if you don't know much about them, they were founded by the same guys who basically created the world's first meat and labs, Mark Post and Peter Verstraat, two Dutch, that's a Dutch name, don't know if I got it right. They created the famous $325,000 hamburger in 2013, and they founded Mosa Meat. And one of the things that they did and talked about this past week is they've gotten an 80 times reduction in cost in the medium that actually they use to feed the cells that creates the cultivated meat. So I thought that was a huge achievement. I wrote about it. They also, before that, they wrote about how they're moving off of FBS or fetal bovine serum, which is basically the kind of the inhumane stuff that has traditionally been used to feed, or the medium that has traditionally been used to feed the cells. So these guys are making lots of progress. This is just in a really interesting space. We've been writing a lot, Chris, about how so many of these new alternative meat and cell ag-based meat companies are just getting lots of funding. It's really been accelerating, it seems like.
Is just lighting up with between plant-based and cell-based. And it was funny, we were with some friends the other night and socially distant, but just talking because there's been so much discussion around sort of the ethics around meat packing and meat processing, right? There are problems that have existed for a long time, but you see with COVID just bringing to the fore all the inequity and inequality that's associated with it, right? And what's the cost of having cheap meat? And I think that is certainly discussions, aside from just the supply of it, that are happening right now. So I think that this, we're at this point where things are no longer, I wrote about this in the newsletter this week, which is, Mosa Meat is no longer a $325,000 burger, right? We're moving from sort of the theoretical into the more practical. And every day there's just something new where the breakthroughs are getting closer and closer and more of a reality. And you're seeing that sort of reflected in sort of the frothy investment environment. And you see other companies like the cell-based fish of Blue Nalu. They just they just bought a new facility that's going to be producing, I think, 200 to 500 pounds of commercial grade cell-based fish next year, a week. So, all this stuff is happening. And I think it's happening at sort of the right time, really.
I mean, yeah. What I wonder is, are we going to, obviously, most of meat, it's not a $300,000 hamburger anymore, but are we going to hit a point where, the concept of cheap meat as we know it, like the stuff you buy in the non-organic section of Kroger or whatever, where that just kind of doesn't exist? And since if people are eating less meat, will they be more willing to pay a little bit more for it? And in that sense, I wonder how far the price of something like cultured meat has to come down in order to actually be something folks would buy.
That's a great question. I think it's one of the things that a lot of these guys are thinking about. There's folks like Michael Bacher at Google, who's long been advocating for he leads the Google Food Lab, advocating for taking meat off the center of the plate and moving it to the side. And that's a cultural shift and a cultural mindset shift. And there, I think others like Pat Brown from Impossible, who just recognize that you're just not going to get people to change behavior. They're going to want to eat meat. So let's go after those traditional meat eaters with something that's more sustainable, like a plant-based burger like Impossible.
Well, and just the number of options, right? Like we did a story yesterday, Ashlyn, who's a new contributor to the site, she ate the mycelium-based steak over in Colorado. And the guy from Cook Ventures just raised some money this week as well. And they raise those poultry, the heirloom chickens, right? So it's still eating meat, but they have a whole regenerative, vertically stacked, they have their own meat processing plant, right? And he said up until the Trump rally, they had no cases of COVID at their Oklahoma facility. And so, so there are lots of different approaches people are taking to attacking this particular problem or issue, I should say.
So Chris, I want to talk about the next story we have up. You wrote about Misfits market raising a huge round, $85 million Series B. And I love your headline. You called it an online oddball food marketplace. It is kind of an interesting company, right? Tell us a little bit about this.
So Misfits is, when you first hear about them, you think, because you go to their website and they show a produce box filled with ugly produce, right? Well, that sounds a lot like other things people have done, like imperfect produce and there's another Daily Harvest or something where they take cosmetically ugly, quote unquote, fruit and package it up. But what they actually do, and what they're using all this money for, is they expand it into other categories. So I was shocked to learn was evidently there are a ton of mistakes that happen in the supply chain, especially with CPG companies, right? Like, so they will buy olive oil that's perfectly good. It's just had the label printed backwards. And so they'll buy up all that olive oil because the stores won't buy it, and they'll sell the olive oil that's perfectly good. It just has a backwards label on it. And I was like, can you build a business on that? And he's like, you would be surprised at how many mistakes there are. Trucks go to the wrong place. It's not like banged and dented kinds of things. These are just like errors that happen in the manufacturing of these products and the distribution of them.
Well, it's a dollar store for online.
I don't know if it's a dollar. He said people save about 25%, I think, on their average basket size. But what it does is, so one, you don't have consistency, right? So that olive oil company isn't going to misprint their labels every month. But there are enough mistakes that happen to where misfit markets will always have olive oil. It just won't necessarily be the same brand each time. So eventually they'll move away from, right now, to get to the marketplace, you have to subscribe to the produce box. And the founder was telling me that eventually they'll just become like a Costco, and that you just pay a monthly fee, and then you can shop in it just like a regular market. And it's all stuff that's imperfect or oddball, as I said.
Did he give any other examples besides olive oil of what products they would sell?
It's like everything. Like it's all packaged good stuff, if I can recall. So it's not like meat, right? It's not like deli meat or
shelf stable. But is it all food? Like they're not doing like earbuds or anything like that?
No. This is just, as far as I can tell, this is all grocery related items. And so they're only available on the eastern half of the United States right now in various zip codes. But they're going to use this. They've just built out a new facility. He said that since COVID struck, they've been up, I want to say 400% or something like that. And they've brought on like an additional 400 people. So their business is, when the panic shopping hit and the stores were decimated, everybody sort of scattered to find food where they could. So I imagine that, Misfit was the beneficiary of that.
I mean, did they start as like almost like an ugly produce type of play? And also, like, second part to that question, like $85 million for an online marketplace still seems like a lot of money for something that if Amazon decided to do tomorrow could wipe it out. So, I mean,
I wonder though about that, right? So one, I think I want to say, and I don't know, I think they've raised $100 million to this point, right? Okay. So that is a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So you figure investors want a 10x return on that, right? So they've got to become like $1 billion company at some point to make their investors money back. So I think that there is enough of a marketplace because I think, you've seen record amounts of online grocery shopping over the past 3 months because of COVID. So people are getting more used to it. 7.2 billion in online grocery sales in June, right? And we'll see what the July numbers come out with. So people are getting more used to buying these things, especially if it's stuff that can be shipped and it's not produce, and they can get a deal because this box of pasta was labeled, Barilco instead of Barillo, you know what I mean? Barilla. And I don't think, I'm a big user of Amazon. I know that it's fraught with complications, but it's consistent. The one thing I've noticed though is, have you tried searching on Amazon for things lately? It's become such a rat's nest of like sponsored content and weird and oddball third-party sellers that finding what you want, I don't think that they would get into this space. I don't think that they would eschew selling you a new version of something or a pristine version of something in order to sell you an oddball version of it.
That's a great point. It is kind of a mess. I think that's one of their Achilles heels. I also just think fresh food particularly is one of their Achilles heels. I think that's why Walmart is going to center their premium membership, their Prime clone, on grocery delivery. And that's a whole nother podcast, but I think that's really something we should watch closely. Moving on to this next story, I want to talk a little bit about Storebound, which is a company that I've been following for some time, ever since they released their 3D pancake printer. Basically, they call it a 3D food printer. It's basically a thing that pours pancakes batter onto like a hot surface, and they call it a 3D food printer. it's a little bit generous to call it that. But the company is also behind the fast-growing Dash brand. If you go to Amazon and actually search for any sort of housewares or things like egg cookers or even like air fryers, you'll see the Dash brand pop up. It litters the Amazon top 100 in terms of kitchen gear. And the founder of the company is Evan Dash, who's kind of a wonderkin within the housewares industry, had worked a long time within the space and started his own company about 10 years ago. And the company was acquired this past week by Groupe Seb. I always don't know how I pronounce French names, but they're a large housewares brand in France. And so I thought that was interesting. Chris, they also make the Sobro. Chris, do you remember the Sobro? It's basically a bro hybrid, is a hybrid like table / refrigerator. You remember that?
I don't, but I will tell you, I bought a Dash egg cooker when I first started working at the Spoon, coming up on 3 years ago, for $15 on Amazon. One of the greatest purchases I've ever made. Like, it is something that we use at least twice a week. It's a little 6-egg cooker, makes perfect hard-boiled eggs each time, super cheap, no interface, just one button. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Is it one of those pastel colored schmeg looking colors?
No, it's really nondescript. It's just black. And the only regret I have is not buying the dozen egg cooker. I got just the 6-egg cooker, but it's dead simple to use, works every time and consistently, and is absolutely one of the best kitchen purchases I've ever made.
And that's the thing about them. They produce these, and they're cheap. I think you could buy one of their egg cookers for like $20-$30. Yeah, super affordable. So they come in at the low price points. They did $100 million in business last year. Probably one of the reasons that Groupe Seb looked at them, and there's a whole contingent of housewares and house brand, house goods startups in New York City. Over the past decade, you have the Gourmias and the Chefmans of the world, and there's been a couple venture funded startups like Great Jones and a few others that have been getting momentum. All I think trying to go after the millennial and Gen Y. If you think about us, we're old, Chris, but we grew up with we grew up with brands like KitchenAid and tried and true brands, which are still good. But I think a lot of people think, particularly venture capitalists that are funding these companies, think, well, millennials might want a different type of housewares brand. And so I think some of these startups are trying to be that.
Jen is an elder millennial. She can tell us.
What, tell you if I want alternative cookware brands?
Yeah, no, what you're looking for in cookware.
Oh, I mean, I feel like I'm kind of a weirdo in the kitchen, though, because I don't know. I like to pride myself on being able to cook on anything, no matter how old or crappy it is. But yes, I think in terms of cookware, it's just, I would buy definitely a 6-egg cooker. I just had to press a button on. I think that sounds fantastic. Just, things that can make the job easier without doing the job completely. I guess that's what I'd look for.
Well, I buy when I go to Costco, I buy the pre-hard-boiled eggs. But I'm thinking, Chris, maybe I should just get one of these egg cookers. But at the same time, my wife is tired of me piling up the gadgets. So
I will tell you,
you've been saying that for years.
Yeah, look, I know this is becoming a big commercial for the Dash egg cooker, but it's small and it's dead simple to use, and I swear it's never made a bad egg. Every egg that I've had is
and this is not a sponsor segment. Dash should not pay us.
It's not. But it's crazy just for $15. Right next to I spent how much on a June oven, which can also dry hard boil an egg, bake boil an egg or whatever, hard bake an egg. But yeah, I highly recommend. In fact, if Tiff balks, I'll buy one for you.
But I do think there is a point to small, because I don't know about you old folk, but my generation, I don't even know if I can say that. I'm way old for a millennial. But yeah, I think people are living in smaller spaces now and can't necessarily accommodate. Mike, I don't know what your arsenal at home looks like, but I do have a mental image of it, and I know it wouldn't fit in my house. But yeah, I think small and affordable, especially right now, are huge selling points for any kind of connected kitchen gadget.
speaking of small, I'm going to mention it on the podcast. I want to probably write a story at some point, but the Tetra dishwasher sent out a survey, the company behind that, and they basically said that the Tetra will not be out to 2021. So we're one of the few organizations that are following this, although a lot of people are interested in this tiny little petite dishwasher that goes on the countertop. We'll keep an eye on.
Part of this pandemic, I've been doing more dishes than ever for the past 5 months. Like, it's crazy. Our dishwasher is going through, and we only have 3 people in our house. But because we're not eating out as much, we're not going to restaurants or going to other people's houses or going out to eat or anything. Like, the dishes just pile up, man.
I agree.
It's constant.
We're doing like at least one cycle a day, maybe more. So maybe the Tetra, maybe like we need to get bigger dishwashers, not smaller. Who knows?
Is this a good time to mention I don't actually have a dishwasher?
Do you hand wash everything in the dish, in the sink?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It just, the dishwasher, I've never had one as an adult because they usually don't come with city apartments. So whenever the Tetra comes out, I'll be first in line.
That sounds like the perfect thing. So, okay, the last segment I'm going to actually do, maybe it's a new segment called Mike's Complaints. Chris, I think you have some Magic Spoon now, or you should maybe reordered it. We talked about on the podcast how I'm a sugar cereal freak. So I was willingly parting with $40 to get the 4-box at the Magic Spoon. So I'm okay in spending more money on these D2C high-end next generation CPG brands. But when I saw the Catalina Crunch keto cookie is like $29 for 31 cookies. Like, I'm just wondering if the pricing on some of these really expensive keto food brands are going to be sustainable during the pandemic, or maybe it's just this cookie. $1 per Oreo sized cookie seems like a lot to me.
Yeah. Especially one that doesn't have all the good stuff in there. By that, I mean all sorts of chemicals. But, it's funny you should mention that. I was participating in this thing called the Startup CPG, where they sent me a box of 25 like alternative plant-based things. And some of them are really good. I have a story going up in just an hour and a half on it. And they had like seaweed crisps and potato-based nacho cheese spread and this delicious granola butter. But and even an upcycled cookie from Renewal Mill, who we've covered a lot. But I looked at the cookies and it was like, I want to say $30 for 10 2-packs or something, right? For 20 cookies, which is the same thing right now. Renewal Mill makes things from upcycled okura flour, and they're really good at upcycling. So there's a lot less waste, but I just can't bring myself to do.
And these are not like the big pink cookies or something you get at the mall. These are like Oreo sized cookies, right?
Yeah. And it was good, but it's like, I can't do $30 for 20 cookies. I just, I can't do it.
I feel like my sort of grief with things like this cookie you're talking about, Mike, I mean, yes, price, but also it's just like, why are you making something that's sort of supposed to be an Oreo but isn't an Oreo? Like, if we're supposed to be helping people, and I'm going to kind of trash your Magic Spoon addiction, guys. If healthier eating is the direction we're supposed to be going in, I don't think we should be making healthier substitutes for these foods that were so bad in the first place. I mean, personally, I'm just talking for myself, but like, I think letting go of the concept of even having an Oreo-like thing is the bigger behavioral change we need, which will probably never happen, but that's where I stand on things like this.
We will never let go of sugar cereal, Jen. And Magic Spoon is tasty. You're right, though. It makes sense.
But that's the argument for impossible, right? Like, people who are vegetarian or vegan are like, well, if I wanted meat in the first place, I would eat meat. And why are you trying to replicate meat? It's just, you get people into healthier eating by kind of dangling what they're familiar with.
But I don't know that impossible's dangling healthier eating. I mean,
better eating.
Their angle's a little bit more towards, move away from livestock production rather than, I mean, the keto cookies just feels like a blatant kind of, you'll be much healthier eating this off-brand Oreo, but, I don't know holistically how much healthier that actually is for a person.
Some of the early data that I saw from MPD was that keto dieting really got hit hard early in the pandemic because everyone just went super hard into carbs. I'd be interested to check in with those guys. I'm talking to them on Monday. If we've seen keto make a comeback to a certain degree as people get back on their diets or trying to look good as they head outdoors. I imagine some of it came back, but I just wonder what the long-term impact on keto diets is. Well, this has been a great conversation. Jen, are you baking anything this weekend?
Banana bread.
Banana bread. Have you made the Chrissy Teigen banana bread yet? Have we talked about that?
We've talked about it. I haven't made it yet.
You should definitely make it.
Should I give it a try?
Find it on the internet. It's pretty good. Chris, you're done baking. You got burned out on baking bread.
Yeah, I'm done.
I just need to point out I was ripping on eating high carb foods, and I'm totally making banana bread. So
you should.
Call out my own hypocrisy.
Everyone needs banana bread. Hey guys, well, thanks for spending the time, and it's been a lot of fun catching up.
Absolutely.
Right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.